So I think we'll go ahead and get started. Folks online, let me know if the echo's still there. I think it was from the second computer I have open with the Q&A. So I'll keep an eye on that and watch that coming in. But for folks here in person and online, thank you for joining us tonight. This is Winter Camping on a Budget. So this was originally a blog post for Portage North and Sundog, who let me repurpose it as a presentation. I wrote the blog post for them maybe 2 years ago and then expanded it into the presentation you have tonight. But for the folks that are here, how many of you have been winter camping before? It's fun. It's a niche. It's totally different from summer experiences. For folks online, the Q&A panel again is open. I'll be watching that and try to address questions as they come across. And for folks that are here, go ahead and ask questions as we go. I want to make sure that it's engaging and connected to the interest that you have. Tonight's will mostly be focused on gear, because winter camping is a pretty broad topic. You can talk about all sorts of things, from techniques to gear to stories and experiences. And so tonight will mostly be focused on gear, but we might get into some of the technique because what gear you use is kind of tied to what you're using it for. And so my background in winter camping is I started about 10 years ago. In that time, I've spent somewhere in the range of 200 nights below freezing, many of it in semi-remote or remote places like the Boundary Waters that we're going to be talking about tonight. And so moving forward in the presentation, right? Focus this presentation is introduction to winter camping in remote and semi-remote locations, at least 1 to 2 days from a cloud road. And for practicality's sake, we're mostly going to be talking about places here, like the Boundary Waters. We aren't going to delve into things like mountaineering or high Arctic expeditions very much, because as cool as those are, they require extra skill sets, extra gear that kind of goes beyond the introductory presentation we're trying to focus on tonight. A new set of winter camping gear could cost $4,000 to $5,000, which puts it out of reach for the average person looking to try it for the first time. That's if you're trying to go out with a really nice hot tent, like maybe a snow tracker, and getting brand new skis and all the things that really add up. And if you're trying it for the first time, you might not want to go all in with that expense, and it's impractical. And beyond that, add in challenging and sometimes dangerous conditions, skills, and techniques that differ from summertime. And more complicated planning and preparations in winter camping can seem unattainable. And the thing about winter camping is that though it can be different than summer camping, which a lot of us are comfortable with, there's ways to make it fun. So continuing the presentation tonight, first we'll go into about an introduction of what is winter camping, defining it for the sake of the presentation, what to look for in camping gear. So if you're going out and purchasing gear for the first time, what makes good gear? What makes gear that makes your adventures possible? We'll talk about how to acquire gear on a budget. So trying not to spend $4,000 to $5,000. How do you get into it for the first time without going all in for the brand new top of the line gear? And what to buy first, how to upgrade, how to focus on what your dream is for that trip. For most of us, we don't go on trips all year round. It's not our life. It's something that is a departure from that. And we want those to be a dream for us. We want it to be something that we are looking forward to, and we want it to live up to those dreams. Winter camping, wilderness camping in general, will always have some pieces that don't go the way we plan, and that's part of the beauty of it. But making gear decisions upfront that help you achieve those dreams is really important. And so what is winter camping? For the sake of tonight, we're going to define it as camping happens when temperature dips below freezing, which can mean skiing, it can mean snowshoeing, it can mean dog sledding, and it can even mean canoeing. Here in northern Minnesota, in the Boundary Waters region, winter camping conditions can routinely happen October through April. And so this photo, for instance, this was a first week of October canoe trip. There was zero snow on the ground when we pulled into the parking lot. 24 hours later, we had close to 7 inches in some places. It was a canoe trip. In a lot of ways, it was similar to the canoe trips we take every summer, but the snow makes it winter camping, and the temperature makes it winter camping. And so a lot of the techniques we talk about might not overlap for every single one of these user groups. For instance, we aren't talking about dog sledding very much tonight, because again, like mountaineering, there's a different skill set and more gear. But winter camping principles kind of apply across the board. Why winter camping? Winter camping is a chance to see wilderness in its off season. You go to the Boundary Waters during the quota season, and it can be pretty busy at times. Winter camping is a chance to see it when it's less busy, it's quieter, and it's a whole different perspective on a place that can be familiar to us. It's quiet, it's challenging, and it can be magical. And pulling a quote from Paul Shirky, we spend 90% of our lives in our comfort range. Subject yourselves to things that expand your comfort range, and your whole realm of being expands. Comfort and pleasure are directly balanced by pain and inconvenience. There's a sheer ecstasy in a wilderness setting after a long day. Feeling hot chocolate go down the hatch, hearing wolves howl, seeing the northern lights, all of it erases the memory of any hardship. And the beauty of wilderness experiences, right, is that wilderness has a way of continually challenging us. Whether we've been there one time, whether we've been there 100 times, wilderness has a way of continuing to challenge us. And winter is hand in hand with that. It has a way of challenging us and pushing us outside of our comfort zones. But beyond that is a chance of the reward, of the fun, of the beauty, of the solitude, all of the wonderful things that draw us back to wilderness, and winter wilderness in particular. Winter camping requirements. So planning is essential, as it is with any wilderness trip. But with winter, you're looking really deeply into how to mitigate risk, because preparation is crucial towards understanding that conditions can change rapidly. Extreme weather is always part of the equation. Challenging travel conditions. Short days and long nights. If you are a person that in the summer might travel for 12 hours, if you're really trying to push the miles you're covering, that's just not practical in the winter because the sun sets earlier and the days are short and the nights are long. But with the right gear, winter camping can be done safely, and even perhaps it can be fun, because that's a big part of it too. If wilderness trips are just misery all the time, there's something that you can learn from that. But for most of us, if it's not something that's bringing us joy, it's not worth our while. And so this portage, for instance, this one is on angleworm, the long portage from angleworm. And challenging travel conditions, right? If you are crossing a portage that is waist deep snow, if there is a lake that's covered in slush, travel conditions can be difficult. And knowing how to prepare for those, both in the gear you purchase and in the ways you plan your trip, are essential. Specifically in the Boundary Waters, summer versus winter, the Boundary Waters off season, as we mentioned, is in the non-quota season. So the quota season for the Boundary Waters is May through September. In the off season, you don't have to pull a permit online. You can go to the box, you fill out your self-issued permit, and you go. With that, the past 5 years, quota season users make up about 63% of all permits, or about 27,000 permits. By comparison, winter users, including skiing, snowshoeing, and dog sledding, make up only about 2.5% of all permits, or 1,000 permits or so a year. And so it's a much, much reduced group. Part of that is the technical side of it. Part of it is other things like schools in session. The average person is probably just not going to go out and winter camp for a week, where it's fairly easy to just paddle out one lake in and enjoy a summer trip. More extreme temps, obviously. Quota season sees anywhere from 38 up to 78 for an average. That's for your May through September for this region. Winter can be from lows of -6 up to high of 51 for an average. And obviously that can go much worse, right? You can get down to the -30s, the -40s and beyond in some of those cold snaps of the winter. And official campsite versus on-ice camping, basically the experience is different. We have in our mindset of if you've taken a few Boundary Waters trips, you know in your mind what a Boundary Waters trip looks like. And for a lot of people that come here every year, that's the dream, where they're coming for clear water and balloon calls and places to go on a magical canoe trip. The winter is a lot different. The loons are gone, the water's frozen, and it can be cold. You're camping on the ice a lot of the time instead of an official campsite. The Forest Service tries to keep folks out of the official campsites as much as they can in the off season to kind of give them a break. So the experience is different. And then the gear. This is where a lot of our presentation will rest. Winter camping packing list. Some items from summer transition straight over to winter. You use the same gear for regardless of the trip. But a lot of items might be different for winter camping. So for instance, you might have cold weather gear. You might have different footwear, snowshoes or skis, trekking pole, sleeping bag and liner, sleeping pad, bivvy or cot, tent, maybe the same as the one you're using in the summer, it may be different. A stove if you're hot tenting, sled and pulling harness, bags and packs, which you could use portage packs. We'll go into that. Multiple light sources, snow shovel, auger/chisel, canoe stove, cooking stove fuel, pardon me, insulated water bottle, and axe or saw. So acquiring gear the smart way. Making smart decisions to buy the gear that fits your goals and style of trip. So if you go in any RAI or any backpacking gear shop, you're going to see all this fancy gear, and some of it's really nice. But before you go out on a trip, you're trying to figure out what style of trip you're trying to go for, just like you would whether you're backpacking or canoeing. You're trying to shape the gear that you purchase for the dream of trip that you're trying to set for yourself. And it's important to know that the gear that you're buying is worthwhile and not wasteful, because it's really easy to go out there and buy cheap gear that won't function or won't last or won't fulfill the dream that you have for your trip. It's also easy to go out and buy gear that is used and has so many miles on it, there's no life in it for your ambitions. And so knowing what gear you're purchasing is important, because there's few things that make a winter day in the wilderness more miserable than having a brand new piece of gear and having it fail on the first day. And again, for most of us, we're going out there only a handful of times of the year. We want it to live up to our expectations and dreams and not fail because we made a bad gear decision. Making winter camping affordable, again, thinking back to that $4,000 or $5,000 number, how do we make it affordable? Well, there's a few different ways. The first is to borrow. And for a lot of folks going for the first time, I would recommend going with somebody that's done it before. And if they have extra gear, borrow from them. If you can't borrow from somebody else, you can rent. There's actually a select few outfitters up here that you can rent a lot of the gear from, especially in the big ticket items like tents and stoves, snowshoes, things that we might not have inherently from a summer trip. Buying used, you can buy through thrift or consignment, classifieds, auctions, and surplus. Buying new, buy on sale or closeout, or make your own. Sweat equity equals savings. In the borrowing, again, I'd highly recommend going with somebody that has done it before, especially when you're trying it for the first time. Borrowing gear to try it out and see if winter camping's for you. It is a different flavor of trip, so trying it is important. And don't get discouraged for one bad night. Those happen. One way that I describe it, and it's not to turn off from winter camping, because winter camping can be magical and can be an amazing experience. But in the summer, the difference between a good day and a bad day is usually not that far apart. You might have a rainy day, you might be stuck in a tent, you might lose a piece of gear. But a bad day in the winter seems to have this way of being way more miserable than a bad day in the summer. And so don't get discouraged by one bad night, because they do happen. Renting gear. So like summer camping, much of the gear you need can be rented from an outfitter. Again, that includes that. Some options: Hardwater Sports down in Sandstone, Paragus here in Ely, Sawtooth Outfitters, Cast Outdoors here in Ely, as well as plenty of the dog sledding outfits. You can get gear from, you can get brought on this experience and try it for the first time. It's a great way to figure out if it's something that you actually enjoy. Buying used. It's a great way to get camping gear for any level, especially in the 21st century where buying stuff used seems a lot easier than it used to be. You can always upgrade. The first gear purchase you make do not have to be forever. Thrift, consignment, classifieds, auctions, and surplus. Again, snowshoes, sleds, some tents, wood stoves, and some clothing can easily be gotten this way. Some places that I shop, for instance, I shop Goodwill.com, HeyBid, Duluth Gear Exchange, with the consignment shop down in Duluth, Repair Layer, consignment shop down in Minneapolis, Facebook Marketplace, Gear Trade is an online gear exchange website, eBay, and REI Resupply, all awesome options for going out and purchasing used gear. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see where this ends up. It's going to get recorded, so it'll probably end up online eventually. But yeah, totally.
Thank you.
On the buying new side of things, the key is spending money where it makes the biggest difference. And so if you are going in and looking at this big, long list of items that I don't own any of this stuff, you have to start strategizing what will make the biggest impact on my trip. What will change the way that I travel or sleep, or what will make that trip go from being a total bummer to this is actually fun. Find sales, discontinued styles, and factory seconds. You can find ways to get new gear and get it at a decent price. Some attire is worth buying this way: sleep setups, tents, sleds. Um, Places I go for this: Steep and Cheap. Wintergreen here in town sometimes has sales, but they're also really high quality. Sierra Trading Post sometimes, though it's hit or miss. Steger Muckluck here in town has things like their second sale sometimes during Blueberry Arts and around, and they're also pretty easy to find used. Backcountry, REI Outlet, and plenty of others. Um, Whatever brand you go to, you can usually find a time that they go on sale, especially as you're looking for the change between seasons. And if you are in anything remotely connected to outdoors, you can usually find things like pro deals too, which is an amazing side way to get deals on things. Last way is making it yourself. So making gear from scratch, you can make gear from scratch. If you have the talents for that, it's a cool way to earn back through sweat equity. There's also ways to make gear from kits, or you can modify existing gear to meet the needs of your winter traveling experience. Some attire: snowshoes, tents, sleeping bag liners. Most of the fabric goods to some capacity, but it really depends how gung-ho you are about trying something yourself. Attire. Winter is all about the layers. And so as we transition into talking about some of the specific items, winter is all about the layers. So stay warm and dry. Base layers: fleece sweatshirt, weatherproof outer layers, jacket and snow pants, lots of wool socks, ski masks, snow goggles, warm hat, and mittens with liners. Where to buy? Attire can be thrifted, so you can go to a thrift store and get some of the things you need, or they can be found through classifieds for some of the higher priced items. Used winter gear can often be found in like new conditions, so a lot of people get into winter sports, they try things on, they use it once, and then they put it in the closet and never use it again. This happens more in specialized items like Steger Mucklucks, for instance, but it can sometimes be found in like new conditions. Search for sales with those seasonal changes. So as we're transitioning into spring, a lot of winter stuff goes on sale. And if you're brave, make your own mittens, anoraks, or hats. What to look for? There's a lot of options out there, and much of it is cheap and low quality. And so digging through it a little bit, as a rule of thumb, bring lots of extras on a winter trip. In the summer, if you go on a summer canoe trip, you could have gear break, you could have gear tear out or be uncomfortable, and it's not that big of a deal. In the winter, attire becomes a lot more about health and safety. And so if you have a piece of gear, clothing fail on a winter trip, you could put yourself in some trouble. So bring options, bring lots of layers, especially in the base layers, because those are what are truly keeping you warm. And definitely lots of socks and base layers, like I said, and down insulated outer layers, amazing. And for hats, there's lots of options. For gloves, lots of options. I still rely on a layering system. And so you can go out and you can buy a really warm set of gloves, but if they get wet or they get torn, they're no longer giving you the benefit you're looking for. And so for me, I use a layering system just like I do for the rest of me. I have some type of liner on, maybe a wool glove inside of that, and then something like a surplus mitten or a large over mitten that goes up to the forearm. So I'm using layers in everything to make the most of that, but it also lets me switch things out as things get wet or warm or uncomfortable. Footwear. So footwear that keeps your feet warm, dry, and protected from wear and tear while traveling. For instance, you want it to stay warm because it's cold. If you step in slush, you are suddenly wet, which isn't ideal. And snowshoes or skis do wear on your feet, and so making sure that it's something that can protect your feet that during that traveling experience. There's two different goals. For above 20 degrees, you really want it to stay dry. You start getting into melting slush on the top of the lake. Something like a muckluck might not do it. You might just soak through. You can grin and bear that a little bit, but you're going to wake up to frozen footwear the next morning. For below 20, extra warm like mucklucks becomes ideal. Footwear, where to buy. For footwear, Steger mucklucks for me are the gold standard for deep winter, but they can be $250 a set. Something like a muckluck, right, is tailor-made to keep your feet warm if it's 40 below. They can be less ideal if you're getting up to 30 or 40, obviously. But to save money, you can buy Stegers from classifieds or wait for the factory second sale. It's amazing how many of these go up on Facebook Marketplace all the time from people that went to somebody like Blueberry Arts or came to Ely and bought a set, used them once, tucked them away, never used them again. Set I have on right now came from Facebook, brand new for like $50. So it is possible to find those things on classifieds. But if you don't, aside from Steger, look to surplus. So there are surplus mucklucks like these. Are they as nice as Stegers? No, but they can keep your feet warm well below zero. You can buy liners for these that really help extend them. And at $40, you're not really going, can't really go wrong. And there's also bunny boots, which are also surplus, can be 50 to 75. They can be a little clunky to use, but they will keep your feet warm and dry, which is a big deal. Footwear, what to look for. Footwear that's rated to be warm and dry. Footwear that has traction on ice. Many hard rubber options do not grip well. And room for socks. I often go up a size. It's easy for people not thinking about it to just go to the store and buy your normal tennis shoe size and then realize you don't have room for socks in them. If you do that, what you can do is constrict blood flow to your feet. And even if you have a whole lot of layers on, your feet will get cold. If you're using snowshoes, make sure footwear works with it. For instance, with Steger mucklucks, I have issues sometimes using them with a modern snowshoe because if it has a clamp or a ratchet system, they tear into the side of the leather muckluck. So just being aware of how your footwear interacts with your travel equipment. Snowshoes. Snowshoes are one of the easiest pieces of gear to buy used. They are everywhere. You can get them on classifieds, you can get them on auctions, you can get them on thrift store websites even. It's amazing how many there are out there. I tend to prescribe to some version of a 2 snowshoe system, which basically means I have a set of snowshoes for the lake and a set of snowshoes for the portage. The reason for that is something like this snowshoe, and we'll go into styles a little bit on the next slide, but something like this Huron snowshoe here is great for big open deep snow, but it might slide if I start getting to hills. And it gets really hard to get up a steep hill, especially with a loaded sled if I'm getting like a traditional snowshoe. You can mitigate that a little bit. There's always techniques for everything. But something like I might bring a modern snowshoe, I might bring a smaller snowshoe just to get in a little more grip on slopes when I hit portages. Reliably get fantastic prices all over the place, like I mentioned. These can also be made at home. There's a couple companies that make kits. You can buy the kit, buy just the wood frame and weave it yourself. Or you can do it from scratch. I use trekking poles for portages. This just helps get a little more grip, especially if you're pulling weight. It can be really nice to have that balance. New snowshoes for a cheap set of moderns can be like $70 on up to $400 for something like a really nice traditional snowshoe. There's fewer and fewer companies making traditional snowshoes. Faber, for instance, has recently stopped. Iverson still does. We have Northern Toboggan here in town in War Road that does. Used, you can buy stuff from $15 to $50 pretty consistently and get a decent snowshoe. And when talking about snowshoes, there are so many options out there, from moderns to classics and so many styles in between. And so comparing the two is a big deal. Part of that is figuring out what type of trip you're looking to take. Moderns like these are often way smaller than something like this enormous Huron I have next to me. And it's because oftentimes they're designed for a pack trail. It won't keep you on top of waist deep snow very well, but it does great at gripping. Classics, a large surface area for maximum float on deep snow. Binding's made to not come off while moving. So in this case, this one has just a pull behind strap and lacing on top. Sometimes they even have a ratchet that cranks tight. That's made to not come off. Classics, there's a full range. This one's made to not come off very easily. If you go, I have a buddy that swears by, this is the lampwick bindings. It's a very traditional way of binding to a snowshoe. They don't come off if you're watching them, but they're really easy to slip in and out of. And there is some practicality to that. Like if you get stuck, it's nice to be able to get out. Primary advantage of moderns is having spikes in the bottom. So a lot of moderns either have a steel spike like this that kind of acts like a crampon, If you go to something like an MSR snowshoe, they might be all plastic, single piece, and have a lot of little spikes in the bottom. What's nice about that is you can dig in. Where on a classic, you might kind of be skiing down the hill backwards if you're not careful. With a modern, you can really grip into ice. Classics can slide on slopes difficult to climb ridges. What I do find is out on an open lake, this turns into one big snowball. When you start getting into the slush, the spikes really turn into just a giant ball of ice, and that can be pretty annoying and hard to mitigate. Moderns can be uncomfortable on long mileage. That's a lot of pressure point on the bottom of your foot. It's also the ratchets, if you over tighten them, can be pretty uncomfortable. Classics have a springy frame because they're wood and they're flat underside. They can be pretty comfortable for long distances if you're smart about what your binding is. And many models are difficult or impossible to field repair. And so you go to something like this one I have in front of me. This is riveted together with these straps over the side. This one wouldn't be too bad. A lot of them have this integrated into the decking. So if you tore it out or broke the plastic, you have no hope of fixing it in the field. There are moderns that are easier to fix. Like there was an old company called Sherpa that was really popular with trappers out east and northeast. And it was basically made like a modern or a classic snowshoe. It was just neoprene woven through, and if that tore out, you could kind of field repair it with paracord or whatever else you have on you. But a lot of modern snowshoes are next to impossible to fix if they did break on a wilderness trip. And because classics are made from natural materials, a lot of what is here can be fixed in the field. Some stuff is really hard. Like if you completely bust out a frame, it's pretty hard to make it work super well for the rest of the trip. But something like tearing out pieces of the rawhide, you can sort of mitigate. Question that just came in over the online was a recommendation for good beginner snowshoes. So many kinds, confusing. I'll dig into that a little bit. The big thing for me, like I just said, is I love traditionals, and it feels good, it looks good, it works so much better on deep snow. And for us here in Ely, if we're on an unbroken trail, this makes so much more sense than this. A modern is great for jumping out on a pack trail, and that's mostly what it's there for. But yeah, there are so many options out there, and I would like to personally buy something that I know I can fix if I need to. If it breaks, I don't want to just have to go replace it. And I like something that I can depend on a wilderness trip, because if I can't, then it's just a liability more than anything. And this is the comic I saw on, I think, Iverson's website, which is modern snowshoes have you deep in the snow, traditionals keep you on top. But talking about the classics a little bit, there are 5 different styles primarily, but there's infinite variety in this. You have Alaskans, which can be enormous. You have bear paws, which are a little bit smaller. Hurons, which are like this. You have a modified bear paw. You have something like an Ojibwe, which I have way down on the end here, that this one doesn't have anything in it. And this is actually a good example of you can buy a frame and put webbing on this, which I'm waiting to do. There's different styles, rawhide versus neoprene. So old school was rawhide that's soaked and then you varnish it each year. Sometimes you can do things like stick epoxy on strategic places because you see where this is wearing on me. I haven't done it varnishing this year, and it shows. A lot of companies made traditional snowshoes that transitioned into the modern world, started using neoprene because it was lower maintenance, and they are really nice. And that's what I will be putting on this saddle.
That's not neoprene. It's like leather.
Yeah, so Iverson's is this weird like combined neoprene it's layered.
Oh.
And so there's 3 layers in it.
Oh.
Iverson cut them themselves because it's really hard to find the material in strips, and so they'd buy these huge sheets and they cut them.
Oh.
But yeah, it ends up looking like this faux leather, and they do make like a black neoprene too, which looks more like your traditional neoprene. Wide variety of binding options can buy separate of the shoes. So even if you buy snowshoes and don't like the binding, swap them out for what works for you. and proper sizing, because something like this, which we're going to use the window display soon, is, I would say this was a kid's snowshoe. Um, but you want to, I mean, it totally depends on the style. The sizing charts vary, but you want a snowshoe that keeps you more or less on top of the snow. If you get too big, it becomes uncomfortable to walk. If you get too small, you sink. Okay, skis. Easy to buy used. They're all over the place, but you want to make sure they fit your tripping goal. If you're on a wilderness trip, you're not on a groomed ski trail anymore, and because of that, the skis you buy become important. Do you go waxed? Do you go waxless? Some of that's preference. Some of that's how you are hoping to use them. Backcountry ski, do you go something that has the steel edge to it because you're no longer on a groomed ski trail? Again, kind of comes back to how you're hoping to use it. And then make sure that you have boots that leave room for 1 feet. On a racing ski boot doesn't have a lot of room inside of it. And your feet can get cold if you're on a wilderness trip that's outside of the ideals of a groomed ski trail. So you want to make sure that whatever footwear you have leaves you room to be warm, because a wilderness trip often extends beyond the ideal, right? And so you're trying to plan for that with the gear that you have. Didn't talk about skis very long compared to snowshoes, sorry, but I'm more a snowshoer at the end of the day. It's what I use in the vast majority of my trips. Sleeping bags. So this is where I would spend money first. If I was going to buy something and spend money in it, I would spend it on a sleeping bag because it's versatile in both keeping you alive, keeping you healthy, and keeping you happy and comfortable. It's nice to go to a warm sleeping bag at the end of the day. It's also a nice risk management tool if you ever had something happen, like you broke through ice or lost a layer of some kind. And so it's where I'd spend money first. I usually use some version of a two-bag system for comfort and cost savings. There's a lot of different philosophies in this. If you were to go online, there's every sort of idea under the sun. The reason I use this is for a couple reasons. I use a synthetic outer bag, 20 to 40 degree bag, and I use a down inner bag that's negative 30 to 0. What that does, it gives me some compounding warmth. It also, the big enemy of cold camping is condensation. And so down, for instance, doesn't insulate super well when it gets soaked. And so putting a synthetic bag on the outside is a way to take some of that moisture while also adding some warmth. Fleece or wool liner for added warmth and instant comfort. A lot of synthetic materials are cold to the touch when you leave them outside in a 0 degree temperature, but sticking something like fleece or wool on the inside makes it feel warm instantly. It also adds some warmth because those ratings are pretty good, but they vary company to company, and it's nice to have that added comfort.
Put that fleece or wool inside your down bag?
I usually do, and it's a nice way to keep that bag clean too. It's why you use a liner during the summer, is to keep it clean. But in the winter, it's nice just to add that comfort and warmth. I've found that for me, it's so much more comfortable to climb into a fleece liner than it is to go into a synthetic bag.
To use fleece.
Yeah, and mine's a DIY. It's literally just fleece from Joann Fabrics that I sewed into a box, and I can stick in a sleeping bag, and then I can wash that. But it adds warmth too. Okay. Like it's all I use during the summer. I usually don't have a sleeping bag along. I'm just using that liner, and so it's multi-purpose in that way. Where to buy? Can buy from classifieds or from outfitter sales. When buying new, search for sales. They always go on sale. A cheap bag usually falls short of its rating, has low quality zippers, and can be difficult to use in wilderness scenarios. So test stuff first. Make sure it's a bag that you can zip shut. We'll dip into that momentarily with the next slide. And liners can dramatically improve bag warmth. Easy to make at home. Sleeping bag, what to look for. Down versus synthetic. This is an argument that you can go back and forth. And there's options like this bag here has a dry down inside of it, which is a down that has a coating on it. So it's a little more resistant to the moisture than a straight down bag. But you can go back and forth on that. There's pros and cons to each. For me, I really like the down bags for warmth, especially winter camping, but you do have to manage the moisture side of things. Make sure the bag's big enough. It is a bummer if it's not. This bag here is the first bag I ever bought for winter camping. It is an abomination of a piece of gear. the really cheap bag, I think it was less than $100. It is a down bag, which is nice. Quickly noticed, without really testing it at home or maybe just saying it was good enough, I found myself in 15 below zero in Colorado and realized I couldn't zip the bag shut. So that's disappointing, right? And so make sure that you don't make those mistakes because you can mitigate that at home. Zipper quality. So on a cheap bag, you find zippers that snag easy. You might find a cheap zipper that's prone to tearing out or popping down at the bottom of the zipper. A cheap zipper might be plastic. It might also just be a metal zipper that wasn't made super well. Um, a lot of companies put a YKK zipper on it because it's a recognizable name brand. It doesn't have to be YKK to be a decent zipper, but make sure it's heavy enough gauge that you can trust it because you don't want that panicking moment when it's 30 below and you realize your zipper won't work. You don't want that moment because it makes for a long night. Fill power and fill weight. You see those numbers around a lot, especially fill power. It's in the down bags. It's how they describe um, basically the quality of the down. It's a measurement of how much the down compresses. And then fill weight is how much of the down there is. So those are great numbers to look for when deciding on a bag because they basically tell you how high quality that bag is. And it lets you see beyond um, just the ratings because the ratings aren't always regulated super well. And so being able to look into those numbers and decide for yourself beyond just the brand and the rating, is it a nice bag? And then look at the features. So a great example of this is the bag I use now. And what's interesting about it is I wouldn't say it's a nice bag brand. If you were to think about who makes a nice sleeping bag, Slumberjack you might think of as like they make a nice rectangular bag, maybe. They don't really get into the technical gear very much. But they made this bag line of bags for a little while, and it's a down bag. Um, it was originally a $300 bag that I got on a 50% off sale. It's a nice fill number. It fluffs up nicely. I really like the double-sided zipper because it gives some flexibility in how I use it, especially if I'm tucking it inside another bag. You see features like the neck guard that lets you really seal off draft to the bag, which a lot of sleeping bags have. But if I go back to like even this really cheap bag has it. Um, but how do they keep closed? Well, this one has a small little Velcro. This one has really hardy Velcro, which is nice, knowing that it can keep the zipper from popping on you in the course of the night. But what this bag illustrates for me is that you can buy nice gear. It doesn't have to be a high name brand if you're looking at the numbers and can determine that this will do what I want it to do. And that's one way you can save a lot of money on gear. Getting over to a sleeping pad. Insulated pad is a big deal. They make insulated pads and uninsulated pads. We also have like solid foam versus an inflatable. I really like an inflatable pad. I really like an inflatable pad that has insulation in it. It really adds to the comfort in the winter night. Look for clearance sales. Be very wary of used sleeping pads. So a lot of gear you can go out and buy used and have some confidence in it. Leaks are repairable. Delamination and mold usually aren't. So if a sleeping pad has gone moldy, if a sleeping pad has started delaminating, like you're seeing bubbles on the inside of it, that's a big deal, and that's something that you probably can't fix, and it's not worth your money. Reflective shield underneath. So this is a trick I was taught pretty early in winter camping. And it's a nice way to compensate if you haven't bought a insulated sleeping pad, but are looking for a way to increase the warmth. You can add something reflective underneath you. And so I've used a car windshield sun protector. I have a friend that uses like the reflective bubble insulation, essentially. It's a way to add just a little bit more warmth. And if you're in a tent that um, doesn't have a floor, like many hot tents don't, it can protect your sleeping pad a little bit. Foam versus inflatable, there's some preferences on this, but I do really like the inflatable for comfort more than anything. Bivvy versus cot. So this is an item that you might not use during the summer because a lot of modern backpacking tents have a waterproof floor. But in a tent without a floor, like many hot tents, one of these is key to staying dry. And so Bivvies are the easiest and the lightest. You can tuck all your sleeping bags inside a bag that protects you from condensation, protects you from the snow, keeps these sleeping bags dry, which may not be a huge deal in 1 to 2 night trips, but if you're getting into a week-long trip and your bag is frozen solid, it can be kind of miserable. And so mitigating that moisture level is a big deal. Make sure you can fit your winter camp setup. So a lot of summer weight bivvies are made for summer weight sleeping bags, and you'll find that you go to like a -20 bag, like the Slumberjack here, and it might not fit in a summer weight bivvy. Cots add some needed space in the tent. They can also be clunky and add a lot of weight to a sled. But what I do like about them in a hot tent is you can tuck gear underneath them. Both can be had from classifieds or from discount sales.
I don't know too much about babies. Are they just basically a waterproof?
They're basically just a waterproof sack. They can go up to basically being a solo tent that you don't have any room to move around inside. So they can be more like a heavyweight rain jacket material, or they can all go down to like a basically a backpacking tarp material. But they're basically just there to keep moisture from getting inside your sleep setup. I have some buddies that love just like throwing it out on the ground and sleeping there regardless.
They're no tent. They just
Right.
sleep in the bivvy.
And you can kind of protect your face a little bit and that sort of thing, which is a challenge in winter camping too.
Do
Because
they throw the pad that they're sleeping on in that too? Then,
depends how
big it is.
big it is. So sometimes you can. Some hammocks, some bivvies have a sleeve in the bottom that you can tuck in, so it's not with everything else. But it's such a wide range in what bivvies can be. At best, I mean, at worst, they're basically a garbage bag. You tuck everything in. At best, they're basically a solo tent. Getting into the tent, 3-season, 4-season, ice fishing shelter, hammock, build on site like a Quincy hot tent. You can make an argument for most of these. The choice depends on conditions, the trip goal, and the budget. So if you're just going out in the backyard, an ice fishing shelter might be really easy. You can just pop it up, but it might be bulky for if you're trying to make a huge number of miles and you want to pare down to a ski level setup. So the gear always totally depends on what your goals are for the trip. 3-season is the absolute easiest place to start because you probably already have one for summer camping. That said, 3-season gets old past about night 1 or 2. You start building up condensation. You really don't have a great way to dry it out a lot of the time in the winter. But it's an awesome place to start. And if you're trying to move fast, hot tent setups are heavy. It can be nice if you're trying to go far distances. If you're going hard to reach places, just go with a lightweight 3-season tent. But moisture becomes a problem. Hot tent for me is a game changer in comfort level because yes, you can have a warm place to sit, which is nice when you're in the tent for as long as you can be in the wintertime. Nights are just long. But it's also a game changer in how you can get gear dry. And so on a cold tent trip, I might get a sleeping bag that's covered in condensation night 1. By the time I get to it on night 2, it's a frozen board that I have to kind of work my way into. Hot tent allows me to dry that out. So I can fire up a stove in the morning, get gear dry. I can sit there in the evening and actually enjoy my evening, where on a cold tent trip, it feels like, well, I'm in the tent, it's time for bed. So it's a big game changer in the rhythms of the trip for me. And it goes beyond keeping the tent warm. My group, I have a group of guys that we go for a week-long trip every January. And for us, we treat it basically like a cold camping trip, that we have the stove to get stuff dry. So we don't keep it going throughout the night necessarily. We are prepared to sleep in temperatures down to 30 below, but we have it there to dry out gear and to have a comfortable space to enjoy the evening, which is a big deal. It's so good for the morale. Where to buy a tent? Start with the tent you already have. Like I said, you can purchase a used canvas tent and retrofit. I'll talk about this a little bit more in the next slide. If not crafty, they can be found used, but no purpose-built hot tent is cheap. They can be anywhere from $1,000 up over $2,500 if you're going to some of the nice like snow trackers. This one's an Attire that my buddy bought. It's a really nice tent, and they are amazing. But getting into it for the first time, if you're looking at just trying it, that's a big price tag for getting into something. And that's why it's really nice to be able to either borrow or go rent something from the outfitter, see how it works, see if it's something you can do, and keep working through it that way. Tent, what to look for. When buying a tent to retrofit into a hot tent, buy a canvas tent, preferably with the flame retardant coating, and modify it by adding a stove jack. It can also be done with a pop up. So when we were looking, wow, that picture did not scale up well. But when we were looking to get into hot tenting for the first time, transition from the cold tent camping that we had all been doing and into trying hot tenting, this is the tent we used. So this is actually a old Girl Scout tent. Um, Showed up on eBay for fairly cheap, bought it, cut a hole in it, sewed a dedicated fabric stove jack into it, so you don't burn out the canvas tent, and it works. And it worked great for us, and it let us try this for the first time and see how it worked and see what doesn't work. I had probably my most miserable night in the backcountry in this tent on Whale Lake by Eagle Mountain when I showed up and despite hundreds of nights in the wilderness, didn't bring a sleeping pad. And the tent dropped to 15 below zero and couldn't get any fire to start in the tent. And none of my 3 stove options worked. So I ate cold chili and had a cold, long, miserable solo night. And sometimes that happens on wilderness trips. But gear like this lets you transition into a better setup in the future. Does anybody recognize the spot, by the way, even though it's just this ridiculous scaled out option? But I've showed this picture a lot. It's Watap Lake over east of the Gunflint. And what I love about winter camping, one of my favorites, is you can set up on the lake, which means this was a spot I always wanted to camp. There's no campsite on the American side on that chain of lakes, so you can't camp anywhere close to that. But in the wintertime, it's on the lake right there. You see pictures from the top of this all the time. It's one of the most famous like Boundary Waters Instagram photos, for lack of a better term. But I love it. It's a sentimental spot to me as well.
What is it near?
It's east of the Gunflint, so it's
Okay.
like you have
By
clear
Magnetic Lake up that way?
a little further east. So if you
Okay.
get over to from Magnetic, you go over into north and south, which are on like the old watershed divide,
Okay.
height of land. And if you keep going past that, you get into Rose and Duncan and Daniels
yeah.
and that.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
Grove and Watap are just over the long portage from Rose.
Oh, okay. I know where it is.
You want reliably stable poles can change out an old canvas tent. So this one, for instance, has these ridiculous wood poles that like basically China doll nest on top of each other. So you have a lot of like play to it, which you might not want if you have a stove cranking inside. And so changing those out is a possibility because you want something stable. Getting into wood stoves, looking to hot tent, buy a stove. A good camping stove is less than 50 pounds, hopefully. Has packable stovepipe sections and folding legs that are great because if you're shoving it into a sled, that's nice. Can be found in surplus or used. There are some cheap modern stoves, aren't the best, but get the job done. So this stove, for instance, this is a cheap modern stove in comparison to some of the nice ones out there. I mean, I think it's like $100 stove. You can pick it up on Amazon. It's probably not the best stove out there, and I know it isn't. But you're heating a tent. It doesn't take a lot to heat a tent. Downside to that stove: no folding legs. It's heavy, as stoves go. And give or take, I mean, there's pieces on it that might break over time if you're not buying a nice stove, but it also doesn't take that much to heat a tent well. Um, so a lot of it comes down to how efficiently can you pack it and can you use the features on it. You can find them in surplus or used. There are some cheap modern stoves that aren't the best, like that one, but they get the job done. And new stoves can be in the hundreds of dollars. There's also some surplus stoves that have gotten crazy high demand, and you'll find them selling for more than the new stoves, even though they're covered in rust and it's this weird backwards thing. But they are nice. That stove there, for instance, is a surplus stove that is routinely going for over $300 on eBay, despite the fact that it's like a military surplus stove from 40 years ago. But supply and demand, and people hook onto a piece of gear that they really like. and then there's a demand for it. Sled and pulling harnesses. So what sled you got have kind of depends on how extreme you're getting into this. You can get an ice fishing sled like a jet sled. You can get a toboggan or a pulk. They can be wood or plastic. Easy to find a cheap sled in classifieds, but how does it change your trip? If you bring a jet sled, for instance, like an ice fishing sled that's super wide, it can be tough going across a portage that's not been broken before. Our trip 2 years ago, my group went up to over to Sawbill and then went up the long portage from Zenith to Luhanita to Zenith. It's a long portage, even in the summer, and it hadn't been traveled yet that year. And it took us almost 2 days to get across that single portage. We camped in the middle.
Wow.
Because it hadn't been traveled yet that year, and there's plenty of up and downs, and a wide sled can be tough going through. So what sled you pick kind of determines how efficiently you travel. At the same time, if you're not planning on traveling a huge number of miles, it's probably not worth spending the money on a high-end skiing pulk if you're not expecting to take that level of trip. Wood is really pretty, but it requires maintenance, and if you don't keep up with it, your toboggan can stick and then become just a nightmare. Longer, narrower sleds are more efficient, especially on portages when you're looking to travel through breaking trail, because something like a jet sled might be wider than you on snowshoes, and then it's literally just catching the bank for the entire portage. Pulling harness. You can get a really nice pulling harness and a really nice pulk setup, but easiest place to start if you're trying it for the first time is literally just get a waist belt. Like a waist belt off a portage pack, get a pair of carabiners in the back of it and hook it up to the sled. Give yourself enough lead that you're not going to run into yourself in the lake. The downside of that is if you get on, and the reason the poles exist on a pulk, is if you get on a place like a portage, that sled can catch up to you and take you out at the knees, which is uncomfortable. But for trying it for the first time, it's a really cheap, easy way to get into things for the first time. Bag/packs. Those specialty bags can be nice in a log toboggan or pulk. Portage packs from your summer canoe trip can easily suffice. Limit the number of loose items for efficient and less frustrating travel. The funny story I have here is that trip from Zenith to Luhanita to Zenith. One of the guys that was brand new brought along, he was trying to be kind, brought along this baguette. It was like this full-sized baguette, which didn't fit in any pack. So this baguette is sitting open in a sled for this entire portage and falling out every time you hit a hill, and you just keep throwing this dumb thing back into the sled. So limit the number of loose items because travel can be frustrating if you have things flying everywhere. Search classifieds or buy on sale. Large duffels, hockey bags, ice fishing shelter bags, and toboggan bags can be all great alternatives to a specialized bag. You can find them. They are nice. A lot of times if you have a toboggan, you have some type of tie down on top anyway. But limiting the number of loose items just limits your frustration. Multiple light sources. So winter trips have shorter days. You will be running a flashlight longer. Batteries lose power in cold. Get high quality lithium ion batteries because batteries drain. A small clip-on night light can be really nice to hang from the tent ceiling. Reason being, if you're sitting in the tent for 14 hours, it's nice to have some like comfort ambient light. It's a really long time to be sitting in the tent, and anything you can do to make it more hospitable is a big deal. Snow shovel. So it's handy for campsite setup, especially for a hot tent, to shovel out where the stove is going to be. Stoves can get unstable if they melt unevenly. It's also nice to clear where you're going to sleep. Collapsible or not, this is an argument that isn't always easy to determine one way or the other. One of my friends absolutely hates the collapsible shovels. There's a good reason for it because they can break. They're made to be lighter weight, and if you have just a wooden handled shovel, it's probably not going to break on you. This might. The reverse of that is a collapsible like avalanche shovel can fit nicely in a sled, whereas a big snow shovel might not. It's easy to find a deal. Make sure it fits your sled. Auger and chisel. Yes, you can melt snow, but a hole in the ice is far more efficient, especially if you're trying to cook and make water for lots of people. Collapsible hand auger or chisel is very helpful. Make sure it fits in the sled. Loose items can be a drag. Easy to get deals on a sale. In the fuel side of things, if you're hot tent camping, having a reliable cook stove is still super handy as a backup. Bring options, cold weather, reduces function, especially in things like isobutane, which struggles to light below zero. My miserable trip on Whale Lake was much for this reason. I had 3 different levels of stove along. Isobutane didn't light. The battery I had in my BioLite, which is a wood burning cook stove, failed to go. I didn't have white gas along, and the wood stove didn't light for various reasons. So making sure that you have fuel that lights at the temperature you're planning to camp at, and bring multiple ignition sources. Lighters sometimes fail, matches sometimes fail, not often. But making sure to have options along, because a cold night or cold food is pretty miserable. Axe and saw. So most of the year, I would say an axe is a bad risk management decision. It's an accident waiting to happen, but in a hot tent, it can make it far more practical. An easy way to find dry wood is to split it and still use dead and down. Leave no trace, even if it's wintertime. Make those decisions about good leave no trace regardless, because you don't want to be paddling through there in the summer and see cut logs all the way down the shore because somebody in the winter came along and cut their firewood right on the lake edge. Sharpen stuff before a trip, because a dull axe is an accident waiting to happen too. Easy enough to pick up nice used options. Insulated water bottles can be the last one. Hydration is vital during winter adventures. Uninsulated water bottles will quickly freeze, leaving you well behind. So packing like a Nalgene along, this probably will freeze in an hour or two, and even less than that before I can't get it open. Eating snow will not keep you hydrated for very long, and insulating water bottles are vital because you want to be able to open it and drink water throughout the day. Even if it's hard to remember to do so, it is essential. My group tends to make a process of filling it with warm to hot water to start the day, and then keep it upright in a sled. Because if it's upside down, you tend to freeze the lid first, and then you won't be able, to get it open. Cycling up. So the key to buying great outdoor gear, regardless of the activity or season, is to be in a continuous process of upgrading. So if I'm going to buy cheap gear to start with, I'm planning to upgrade those pieces, but I don't have to upgrade them all at once. Purchasing used gear or DIY solutions until you love an activity. Sell or consign when you're ready to upgrade. So if you are moving on, you can sell that and get some of your money back, or you can keep it to borrow to your friends who you're going to introduce to this activity. I joke with my friend that owned the Attire, which is the tent in the back here, that I'm the reason for so many people's gear expenses. Because I introduced him to winter camping. He has since introduced like 20 or 30 people to winter camping. He's bought this $1,000 and something tent. So it can be an activity to introduce other people and bring other people along on. And that's pretty rewarding. As you learn your system, upgrade to the new gear that best equips it. And don't be afraid of new tech. It's a thing in every aspect of the human experience, but especially in the outdoor world, that you latch on to. This is the piece of gear that has always worked for me. It's worked for me for decades, yada, yada, yada. And you never upgrade. And that's fine. If it works for you, stick with it. But don't be afraid of new tech. There are always new innovations coming out that can make your trip better and can make it easier for you to achieve the dreams you're looking to achieve. This is not a hard and fast chart, but assuming you have the gear for a summer trip, when buying your first winter camping gear, I would follow some version of an upgrade strategy. So how do you upgrade gear over time? From the entry-level used gear, lower quality, that you start with to get used to it, and then work your way up to really nice gear. And so basically, this is just a way for me to illustrate how you emphasize what you spend on, what you don't spend on, that sort of thing. So basically in this chart, in my first purchase, so I figured I want to be in winter camping, I want to go winter camping, I'm going to spend my money on 0-degree sleeping bag and that reflective shield. And I need that stove fuel. And I want high quality clothing because that keeps you comfortable when warm. You can buy things like snowshoes used, sled used, save money in those places. And all of these things you can probably bring along from your summer trip and just use that gear for those first times winter camping, like a 3-season tent and a cook stove. A lot of this is repeatable. You can use it again. When I go to upgrade, I'm probably going to upgrade to wool base layers. Wool is amazing for the ability to insulate and also dry. Um, Snow goggles are great, especially on bright days. You can still go snow blind even somewhere like Boundary Waters. Large volume insulated water bottle, insulated pad. One of my other first upgrades is going to a hot tent, as I mentioned earlier, and that second set of snowshoes. But my second time upgrading, I'm probably working into something like finding that nice sleeping bag. So moving beyond what, in my case, is this cheap 0-degree bag and moving into this down negative 20-degree bag that I really love. I'm also probably upgrading my footwear to something like Stiga mucklucks that I know I can trust and will keep me warm and keep me safe. Upgrade to a more efficient sled. So it's really nice to start upgrading some of those things. A jet sled is fairly easy to get cheaply, but if you're trying to move efficiently, figuring out what the next thing is. Tent lights and so on. And then maybe I'm upgrading to a larger capacity tent, or I'm upgrading to lighten the load. And so that's maybe my third or fourth priority as I'm making these upgrades, is to start lightening the system. It's much the same mindset you have in canoeing or in backpacking. Is I have gear that works, it works fine, but it's heavy. How do I make that lighter? Because lighter gear makes for an easier portage, an easier trip, an easier what have you. And then my final upgrade is moving into some of those luxury items that might make your trip more fun, more enjoyable, but it's not a necessity. And that's things like a better outer layer, maybe replacement liners for the mucklucks. So if they get wet, you can swap out a liner set and have a dry boot the next day. Maybe you bring a better cook set for the wood stove, or maybe a toboggan bag that specifically fits the sled that you have. Those are luxury items. They're definitely way down my priority list of how I would upgrade. But there are things that once you've decided winter camping is something I enjoy, I want to do all the time, this is some of the luxury items you can start digging into. Thank you for coming to the presentation. So this quote I wanted to finish with is: the common saying that men climb mountains because the mountains are there can only be a trite subterfuge in the effort to capture the elusive real reason why some irresistibly scale heights. On no stranger premise am I able to qualify the fascination which the winter wilderness has for me. It comes from Paradise Below Zero, which is a fantastic book on the subject. So thank you all for attending tonight. Are there any questions here or online that weren't asked earlier? Yeah.
Just want to say the folk school offers a snowshoe making class.
They offer a snowshoe making class, both the one here and the one in Grand Marais does as well. They're both fantastic. And then there are plenty of classes for these skill sets. So even if you aren't renting a tour or an outing from one of the companies that do that, which is a fantastic way to go, there are classes for snowshoeing and skiing and all the gear sets. And it's a pretty cool way to get into the activity.
My biggest challenge when I've gone a few times is getting wood to burn.
Yeah, it can be so hard, and sometimes it just feels like the forest is cursed, for lack of a better term, where there is not a stick in this entire forest that worked. And I haven't found a perfect rhyme or reason to it. I mean, sometimes it's this tree is down but propped up. I know I can probably get it to burn. Sometimes it's figuring out species. Like I had really great luck with this stand of ash on Lamb Lake, where we had fantastic fires every night. And then WhatsApp photos that I showed a couple times, we couldn't get a fire to go for anything. We worked on it for hours and hours and hours, and we finally got it, but it took 3 hours of working at it. So that is definitely one of the highest challenges of hot tent winter camping, is figuring out the wood. There are workarounds as there are any time of year, but it can sometimes just be tough. Couple questions coming in online. Mostly just well-wishing. Thank you for it. Oh, checking out the Winter Camping Symposium. Yeah, that's a great one. Thank you, Chad. There's a Winter Camping Symposium every year. It's a really cool opportunity to meet with people that just geek out about this stuff. You can, like any outdoor activity, you can get so far into the gear for this. And The point of this presentation tonight is you don't have to. You can get into it with fairly simple setups. But if you find that you love this activity, there are ways to really, really hone in your gear and figure out ways to make it click exactly the way you want it to.
Cool.
Anything else? Good. Upcoming events. We have the Ely Dark Sky Festival coming up in January. Here at the office, we'll have 3 presentations going on. I'll be giving a presentation on nighttime wilderness navigating, and Elizabeth Miller, who we've had in before, will be in to talk about Northern Lights for newbies and some of the Northern Light apps. She's a really great presenter and gives really nice insight into Northern Lights. We are probably going to see about streaming those as well, but I haven't asked Elizabeth for permission for hers yet. We'll also have a snowshoe hike that night out at Fall Lake. These presentations like tonight that we had tonight are a monthly occurrence. So I have one presentation every month, either from me talking about a Boundary Waters or outdoor adventure interest topic, or sometimes a guest speaker. We also have a monthly movie night, which is showing classic Boundary Waters films ranging from the 1930s to the 90s, showing glimpses back into the Boundary Waters experience in past decades. Our newest one is coming up this next month. So this is 1992, Leave No Trace, A Wilderness Ethic. So this was actually the Forest Service rules video before the last big management plan update. It's a cool glimpse into what the experience looked like 30 years ago. We also have Every Lake in the Boundary Waters presentation coming up next month, basically looking into, is it physically possible to visit every lake in the Boundary Waters in a lifetime? Looking at some of the numbers, the stories, the nitty gritty of, is this actually possible for a real person? And then Voyager Boreal Stargazing Week is happening during the same week as Ely Winter Festival this year. And so that's February 10th through 17th. There's stuff happening all over the state. You can check that out online. For here in Ely, we have a day full of dark sky documentaries showing here, as well as a snowshoe hike that we're co-hosting with the Forest Service out at Bass Lake. So lots of cool things coming up in the coming months. We also had someone mention Now Outdoors also offers a winter camping workshop in December in Wisconsin every year for beginners. Thank you for sharing that. So that's all I have. Thank you for attending tonight. I look forward to seeing you at future events too, and we will try to make these live streams more consistent so that this content can be signed into from a field. For those that are, I know a bunch of folks have already checked out online, you will run into a survey after you exit. Please fill that out if you get a chance. For those that are here, we have surveys on the table. That just lets us hear how you figured out about this event, because it is a trick to figure out how to market events in Ely. A lot of folks run into physical posters, which is really cool, but it's good to know how people found their way here and find ways to fine-tune these events that they are engaging and best used by you. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.